I thank the distinguished presiding officer, and I also ask consent that two items be included in the record on my behalf as though read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, for the past 2 years, the Republican Party has enjoyed solid majorities in both the House and Senate. They control the schedule, and they control the process. They can decide which legislation to call for debate, and frankly, for all intents and purposes, they can actually decide whether anything gets done around here. Good example is the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. If he had been treated like all other Supreme Court nominees throughout the entire history of this country in a presidential election year, he would have received a hearing and a vote. He almost certainly would have been easily confirmed, just as he was when he was nominated to the D.C. Court of Appeals. Instead, the Republican leadership did not even give Judge Garland a hearing, much less a vote. The Republican senators refused to do their job. And there are countless examples of this. It behooves people in this country who complain about the do-nothing Congress to remind themselves that the Congress controlled by the Republicans, both House and Senate. They can make it possible for work to get done if they want to, or they can make it impossible. And their track record for the past 2 years speaks for itself. Instead of a Congress that sets a standard for the world's democracies, we've been treated to a lesson of how not to get things done. The latest example is the fiscal year 2017 appropriations bills. I went back and I reviewed the record. For months, the Republican leadership extolled the virtues of regular order, and I totally agree with them on that. They spoke with great optimism and confidence about passing appropriations bills, individual bills. Not even an omnibus bill has become the norm. I agreed with the Republican leadership. They said over and over they're going to do their jobs this year and pass these bills the way we used to. And we on the Democratic side fully supported the Republicans on that goal. And we negotiated 12 individual appropriations bills that were reported, with one exception, with bipartisan majorities, in most cases overwhelming appropriations by the Senate Appropriations Committee. Senator Lindsey Graham and I wrote the FY17 State and Foreign Operations Bill. As we always do, we wrote a balanced bill. And as reported unanimously by the Appropriations Committee by a vote of 30-0. Our staffs have been meeting for weeks with their House counterparts to hammer out a conference agreement that the House and Senate can vote on, the President can sign. We could easily be finished by December 9 when the current funding resolution expires. So what's the problem? It's simple. Donald Trump was elected president, and now the Republican leadership has a different idea. Forget all those uplifting speeches about passing appropriations bills. Forget about so-called regular order. Forget about doing our jobs. What's the new plan? Throw 10 months of work in the trash can. Now we're going to punt the ball down the field for another 4 months, and after that, who knows? That's not doing your job. Maybe we'll do it again, end up with a continuing resolution for the rest of the year. There's no way to predict. For members of Congress who may not be familiar with the intricate operations of federal agencies and would prefer not to think about it, the idea of another 4-month continuing resolution may not be a big deal. For those of us on both sides of the aisle who do know, it's an example of government at its worst. Funding the government by continuing resolution means putting priorities and budgeting decisions on autopilot. It stops us having any kind of a voice in what our government does. It negates the hard work that has gone into reevaluating priorities from one year to the next. It negates the careful process of looking at federal agencies account by account to make adjustments as warranted. It means largely making a carbon copy of an earlier appropriations bill or bills regardless of changed circumstances or compelling need to modify earlier priorities. I could give all kinds of examples in the appropriations bill, but let me give you a few examples what it means in state and foreign operations bill. And that's only 1% of the federal budget. A continuing resolution will provide $433 million less than Senator Graham's and my bill for economic development, governance, and security programs like the Power Africa Initiative. It will mean $59 million less for programs to counter violent extremism. Can you imagine cutting money to counter violent extremism? These programs have strong bipartisan support and did in the Appropriations Committee because they're building blocks for stability, where we have critical national security interests that affect all Americans. A continuing resolution will provide $162 million less than our bill for global health, including for maternal and child health programs, like vaccines for children and to combat malaria and tuberculosis. These programs literally mean life or death for millions of people, which is why they've had bipartisan support. Or at least they did before the Republican leadership scrapped the appropriations bills that we passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. In fact, one of the things it will do, a continuing resolution, will provide $454 million less than our bill for security for U.S. diplomatic and consular personnel, for security upgrades for U.S. embassies and facilities overseas, and for cybersecurity programs. I mention that because the Republicans in the other bodies spent tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money decrying the lack of security at our embassies, even after they had already voted to cut money for security for embassies, and now they're going to cut $454 million less. Will they stop their talking points about how terrible it is we're not doing enough for security? Of course they won't, because they hope the American people won't look at the fact that they've cut nearly $500 million out. So when the Republican leadership blames others for not doing enough to protect our embassies and diplomats, as they have a habit of doing, they need only look in the mirror and see they have not done their own work. In fact, the continuing resolution then provides $538 million more for U.S. contributions to international financial institutions, the amount Senator Graham and I put in our bill. That is because the 2016 omnibus provided $220 million for the Strategic Climate and Clean Technology Funds, which is not needed in FY17 because the U.S. will not be contributing to either of those funds in FY17. The balance of $318 million is not needed because U.S. contributions to several international financial institutions are lower in FY17 and FY16. It boggles the imagination. You cut out money for our security of our people abroad and our embassies, but then you put in $500 million more for contributions that we don't need. In fact, a continuing resolution provides $161 million more than Senator Graham's and my bill for contribution to international organizations. We don't need to pay that additional amount because of reductions in assessment and exchange rate costs. It would be nice if instead of putting this money in that we're not going to spend, don't need, we'd actually put the money in to secure our embassies. And we saw by happenstance escaped devastating blast in the Philippines within the last few hours. The continuing resolution will provide $90 million more than our bill for assessed contributions to international peacekeeping. Again, we don't need to pay that additional amount because of reductions in several peacekeeping missions. Now, these are just examples for state and foreign operations. Every appropriations bill has its own laundry list of reasons why a continuing resolution makes no sense It wastes taxpayer dollars, wreaks havoc for the agencies that run the government. Continuing resolutions beyond a few months are illogical, they're wasteful, they're harmful. We end up spending less for things both Republicans and Democrats strongly support, and we waste money on things we don't need and nobody wants. It is bad government 101. It's just what the Republican leadership 10 months ago said they wanted to avoid, and we all agreed with them. But that was then. This is now. It's whoops, forget what we said before. We changed our mind. Let's waste the money. Let's go to the continuing resolutions. I heard Senator McCain, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, denouncing his colleagues for abandoning the regular appropriations process. He knows what it's going to mean for the U.S. military. He knows that the leadership of his own party in stopping regular appropriations bills hurts our military. Senator Mikulski, the vice chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, has called it absolutely outrageous. She called it procrastinating instead of legislating. I agree with her. Another 4-month continuing resolution is completely unnecessary, not to mention outrageous and wasteful and irresponsible. It can still be avoided. Speaking for the state and foreign operations, we can complete our conference agreement in less than 1 week. We're perfectly willing to work into the evenings to do that. I suspect the other subcommittees could do the same or close to it. Certainly we can finish these bills before Christmas. So why don't we? That's what the Republican leadership said they wanted. That's what regular order is. That's how the Congress is supposed to work. We should do it. We ought to just show the American people, for once, we'll actually do our jobs, what we're elected to do. That's what this Vermonter wants. I would hope others would. Mr. President, my full statement on the record, and I yield the floor.